So today I'd like to talk about the color trait of saturation. Saturation can be described as the intensity or the brilliance of the color. Not what color it is, which is the hue, not the temperature, cool or warm, and not the value, the light or the dark. Saturation is the level of purity of a color. A very easy way to think about saturation is its highest point of saturation will be straight out of the tube. The moment that you mix anything into a color, you lower saturation and you lower value. Okay, so the purest form of color is typically straight out of the tube. With saturation, you have to also talk about the opposite, which is neutrality. So complementary colors are the best way to understand both how saturation increases when complements are set next to each other, and then how they decrease when they are mixed together. In order for this to occur, you have to find your true complements, because remember, there are many reds, and there are many types of purples and blues and pinks. So in order to find these complements, you should use your color wheel, and then I can give you a couple shortcuts for locating the accurate complement. So here's a really good list of the complementary scales for you guys to choose from for your saturation studies. So here is a true red and green, with a neutral in the middle between. Here is a yellow and a violet, and notice that the neutrals change position. They're not going to all line up on the same middle row. It's going to occur somewhere in the middle, but because yellow is such a light value, it's probably shifting upwards just a little. And the nature of the neutral will change. Your neutrals are not all equal. So a neutral made from the red-green is going to be very different than the quality of a yellow-violet and an orange-blue. Okay? Here at the end of this list are the tertiary colors and how to identify a tertiary color's complement. So here is a blue-violet, and the best way to think about that is to graph it. So if you have a blue-violet, so we have a blue-violet. The opposite of that, the opposite of the blue is an orange, and the opposite of the violet is a yellow, which means the true color for the blue-violet is the yellow-orange. Okay, so let's go back, and that's exactly what you have. You have a yellow-orange. So all you have to do is graph it. So if this is a blue, then you're definitely going to have some kind of orange. And if it's a blue-green, the opposite of green is red, which means up here you have a red-orange as the opposite of the blue-green. So that's a trick for figuring out your true complement, okay? Because if you had just chosen this orange, you might not have achieved the kind of neutral that you're seeking, okay? So that's a quick shortcut for finding complementary colors. The complementary scales will be created by choosing one set of complementary color on each end of your scale. So here we'll start with the traditional red-green. So make sure you're choosing the correct red with the correct green, and you'll paint these in the purest form on the edge of your scales. Okay, and in the middle you'll be moving towards the opposite color. And this is how a color wheel works. So when you're moving through the center of the color wheel, you're actually moving through neutrality. So as you move to the other side, you start gaining green, and then moving from green to red. After you hit neutrality in the center of the color wheel, you start moving towards greater reds. This color is the best use of a color to create a shadow. So if you're talking about painting a red object, it's not as successful to grab a black or a brown. it's usually much better to grab the opposite, to grab the green and tone the red down into a neutral. What you're going to create is a naturally dark tone that sits well within the red object. Okay? Same with yellows and violets. So when you want to paint a darker version of a color, you will start learning that grabbing your complement is going to be much more successful for creating a stronger shadow for that particular object. Okay? So here's a quick breakdown of your assignment. You're going to choose 3 complements. So you have a blue-orange, pick any blue-orange you want. You can have a red-green, pick whatever red-green you want, and a yellow-violet. You don't have to do all 6. You can just pick 3, any version that you'd like. And then what you'll start to see is that you're going to achieve some level of neutrality in between. And this is going to take you the longest. So go ahead and paint your pure colors on the edge and start mixing your neutral color in between. And what you're going to find is it's not going to be a 50% orange and a 50% blue. It's going to vary from set to set, and depending on the pigment load and the dominance of that color, it's going to change. Many of your yellows are not very dominant. It's a very weak color tinting, and the violet might be a much stronger tinting strength. So it might take very little violet and much more yellow to achieve this kind of value. And then you have to also be very careful about the middle value, right? So yellow is very light and violet's very dark. So, you know, you have to kind of play with how much yellow versus violet as well in order to not get such a light color. So like I said, this is going to take you the longest. So make sure that you keep the extra because these neutrals will come in handy. So don't throw away your neutral. You're going to make a lot more than you need because it's going to take you a while to get that neutral. But once you have it, put it in your saran wrap and tie it up because those neutrals will always come in handy. Now once you have it, you can use this neutral to add to your color as you move to blue and add to your color as you move to orange. So once you have this, you can take a little bit more orange to it and get the next color. And then take this color with a little bit more orange still and get to the next color. So never mix only what you need for this square. Make sure that you're mixing a little bit more so that you can push that color off to the next scale. In terms of how many, I think the assignment asks for maybe 6, but you can do as many steps as you want. Sometimes having more steps is easier. Okay. In painting and design, saturation levels are really important to kind of create focus and emphasis. So many of the artists I'm showing you will be very fascinated with highly saturated and brilliant colors, but they will often balance that with a huge number of neutrals and tints and shades to balance out that saturation level. So even though there's a sort of a decent amount of fairly intense pinks, reds, some yellows, somewhat in the blues, Aaron Noble, a contemporary printmaker, also balances it out with a lot of neutrals. And the neutrals usually come from a set of colors in his color scheme. So this blue and this orange is likely the source of these neutrals. So when you're trying to look at a painting or a design, often the answer is in the design itself. If you wonder where that neutral came from, it's probably the two complements that already exist in the painting, okay? That brings harmony to the choices they're making, and it makes the colors feel like they have a relationship with one another. Cecily Brown, abstract contemporary painter, also very, interested in saturated colors, but if saturated colors are everywhere, it loses the power. So in this case, she's really using a lot of grays and blacks to counteract her high, intense, saturated colors. So if you use an element everywhere, you kind of lose its strength, you kind of lose its power. So you want to find balance in the usage of these things. Okay, we'll also look at Susanna Coffey. You can look at her for very interesting use of highly saturated colors. But I'd like to end with Kehinde Wiley, since he is using a very interesting blue, orange, purple, yellow sort of complementary color set. So in this case, he's really highlighting the orange hoodie, and in order to make that orange hoodie look even more intense, he's created this blue and pink pattern background, because the intensity of the blue next to this orange is really jumping off the canvas. So he really creates these magnificent paintings, these beautiful color schemes, and I think it's very interesting that it's sort of in contrast to this very ordinary, kind of ordinary reclining figure, except that he's on his face, right? Sort of wondering if this person's okay, and it's really an interesting contrast to these really beautiful saturated colors. So saturation doesn't always have to be used to talk about beautiful things. Sometimes it counters difficult subject matter, actually, and it makes the topic more palatable for the viewer. So saturation is a really interesting color to study. Okay, so this is just a little introduction to how you guys can think about using saturation in your color pieces.